So I don't know about you guys, but for us, it's about -10 here. And I'm sure you guys might have it colder than me. A bit of sleet and some weird mix of rain and snow. It was pretty crazy. Okay. I'm going to help you out with that, Daniel. Let's talk about some strategies today, and let's see if I can help you out and see what we can do. All right. So welcome back. We are GDD403 problem solving with data structures and algorithms. And I kind of look at this course, it says back at 10. I kind of look at this course as like a precursor to AI, believe it or not. And the reason why is if you don't have this fundamental course, then you can't really do AI at all, right? Because a lot of the algorithms that we're going to see, that we're going to be talking about, that I want to cover with you, are kind of like AI algorithms in many ways, right? More than anything else. Okay, so let's get into it. So I wanted to go back to what we did before. So let's zoom into our, coding now. And I want to do it with the stuff that we have online. So we have our in-class exercises. We have in-class exercise 3. I'm going to copy paste this one. So copy paste and make in-class exercise 4. Now I've removed the library folder from before. So remember, in Unity, we have this ugly library folder. I've removed it, and now it's easier for us to copy this and make ICE 4. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up our Unity, and I'm just going to go into our in-class exercise 4 for today and bring that up, which is just a copy of in-class exercise 3. And I'm making copies like this because we can leave the previous one alone and then add new things to the new one, okay? That's what I want to do. So I'm just loading this one up. Any questions, general questions around Unity as we're loading this thing up? Things that you don't understand, you can come on the mic for this if you feel like it. Again, this is I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. If you have any questions, we can certainly do this. The other question I have is your Unity now should be fully installed at this point, I think. We shouldn't have too many kind of weird and difficult things in this point when it comes to Unity, like the installation piece. And did you guys all get, let me just ask this question one more time. Did you guys all get ReSharper installed finally?
They haven't gone back to me about like accepting my
Wow. Okay. So
yeah.
Someone got it done. Who was that? There's someone that got it done by sending in the information, like your registration information.
Yeah, that was James.
So James, yeah. So you got it done. So what did James do
James.
different than everyone else?
I don't know. I tried to do that too, like what he did too, but they haven't gone back to me. And it's like,
I would follow up. I would try it again. Say like, hey, can you, it's terrible. I'm feeling really bad. I wish it wasn't like that for you guys. Send a screenshot of the iLearn portal. Yeah, try that again. Try it again, guys, with this stuff. I want to make it easier for you, not more difficult. All right, so whenever we bring up a Unity project that comes up, I just made a copy. Again, hopefully you're in the same spot as me. I'm just going to go into scenes and main for now, and you can see that we were in this card example. We always want to run the previous one first. That's what we want to do, right? And the previous thing that we had done last time. So if I want to run this code, then you can see that this iteration of our in-class exercise allows us to flip the cards And what it does, we kind of let it so you can use a selector of this kind to kind of show the card flipped over and that kind of thing. And that the selector allows you to get some visual representation of how the cards work. Awesome. So I want to continue to iterate on this, and I want to kind of try and focus in on some of the things that it's talking about here. Okay, so here it says the player can select an interface element to set the difficulty setting for the game, right? So that's example 2x4 card matrix, easy, 4x4 card matrix, normal, 6x6 card matrix, hard. Okay, let's focus on this thing. Interface elements, how to make interface elements come out in the game is what I want to focus on, and how this works. So interface elements are buttons and labels and that kind of thing, okay? So the way to do that is let's add a button, like a little on the kind of on the right side of the screen. So again, if you look at the screen itself, so here's what the screen would look like, let's say on the web or anywhere else. And we probably have some space here on the right-hand side, or maybe even on the bottom, that allows us to add buttons to do certain actions. Think about this as a web game or some kind of other kind of game where you can do things, right? And the buttons itself will start the things happening. Right now we have a 1x4, kind of card matrix that we've kind of selected manually. We need to improve our deck as well so we can kind of shuffle the cards. We haven't done that part, and we haven't had a chance to create an opportunity to show random cards here on the thing. I want to get a lot of this stuff done as much as we can today to help you as much as we can with the assignment. So let's think about what this says. It says the player can select an interface element to set the difficulty. Okay. Well, let's take a look at some interface elements. So first of all, when I want to add a UI in Unity, I want to right click in the hierarchy. Do this with me, guys. And I'm going to go UI. And now let's take a look at options. I have a button. I could have different buttons like easy, medium, hard, right? For the difficulty. And I could select a button. There's also a toggle, right? So again, it's under, so if you right click, Justin, and then you go to UI, and then you can do that way. Let me see what you have there. Sorry, it's hard for me to see what you see. Not enough memory. Never seen that before. Wow. Okay, save as. And let's just run that screen. 1 second. So I can see what you're seeing. Oh, wow. Okay. So, and if you go up here, you can't see that. If you go right click here in the hierarchy up here, not down there, but here you did, this is the thing that you see. That's weird. Can you try that again? It's up here. So right click in here and then see what you can see. Is it the same? All right, let's do some troubleshooting. Could be your Unity that needs to be kicked alive again. But let's do this, okay? Well, I know I'm kind of pausing here, but what I want to do is I'm going to let you share your screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want you to share your screen, and I'm going to take over. All right, so if you could do that. So share your screen, and then I'll ask you to take over your screen, and we'll do it from there. So I want to make everyone to be on the same page, right? And I'll show you a couple ways using Justin's screen when you get to it, Justin. There we go. Awesome. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to take control. So I'm going to request control. You're going to see that come through. Okay. There we go. And then awesome. Then I'm going to do what I normally do here, which is for me to right click here. I can control your screen. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So UI toolkit. Isn't that interesting? Wow. Okay. Let's go into assets. Interesting. Okay, well, you can always do it here too. Sometimes you can do it this way. I'm just surprised that you have UI toolkit. Because it's like you're missing something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was gonna try to go through the package manager and see if there's something that's not downloaded or something, but that's normally like a thing that's just in there. So
Yeah. That is weird. Did you have this before? Like, did you have in previous iterations?
I've never had this problem before. I've always had the UI just right there. That's why I started with the canvas and I was gonna put the canvas in there. And I've got the
That's
canvas
it.
like I've got a canvas in there, the component, but
Yeah.
I can't make UI items.
Oh, you can do it manually, but that's a pain in the ass. Let me give back control. So I'm gonna stop that stuff, and then let's get back. Let me share my screen and get into it for a second. That's weird. So what may be the problem is you may need to reboot your Unity. I've never seen that before. That's a weird glitch and a half. But typically in Package Manager, just to show you guys what I have. And Package Manager, you can go to Window, Package Manager to get that. If I go to Unity Registry, then it's going to show you all the stuff that you have here. But then you want to look at in project, all the packages in the project. And notice that Unity UI is in my project. Is Unity UI in your project?
I will check that now.
Yeah, because if it's not, then you can add it in. You can go. What was that?
It's not. I'm installing now.
I
That's like a default thing. I don't know why that's not.
I've never seen that. I've never seen that before. So, I mean, you could remove it. Maybe you removed it somehow by accident. I have no idea. But if you go to Unity Registry, and if you look all the way down, you can always go to Unity UI and then install it manually if you have that same problem, guys. Okay, but it shouldn't be there. And the check mark tells you what's installed. That's all it is. All right, good. I'm glad that we're going to resolve that.
Yeah, it looks like it did install. I'm just restarting Unity to get it in a nice order because it was out of order.
Excellent.
Okay, I got it back. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right, so let's do the next part. So the next part is, like I said, let's do this again. We're going to go right click and I'm going to go UI and let's take a look at some stuff that we have. So we have a toggle, right? And I want to look at these items. So toggle is basically, if you look here on the bottom left corner, the UI is weird in Unity and it kind of does something like this. A toggle is a checkbox, right? That's what it is. And that's what that looks like. I'm just going to undo. You can always undo the things that you do here in Unity too. Undo, no problem, right? So toggle is a checkbox. But one thing you notice is like my UI is like massive and extrapolated in Unity, and it's like a really ugly thing to do. There is another way of doing it. And one way to make it easier for us to look at is to use screen space UI instead of like, kind of the way we did it right now. And well, we use the UI camera. So screen space camera. And the way to do that is if I right click, and if I go to UI, so that was the checkbox for, the difficulty setting is weird. Slider, scroll bar, scroll view, button, and drop down. Drop down seems like to be the good option. All right, so what if I did drop down? So here's a drop down. When I add a drop down or anything more advanced, it says import TMP essentials. So TMP is Text Mesh Pro. In recent years, Unity has incorporated Text Mesh Pro as part of its whole workflow. So I'm going to click import TMP essentials here. Please all do this. All right. And well, at one point, TMP, which is Text Mesh Pro, was a separate thing that was made by somebody else. And Unity has now included it in because it's so good. I'm going to click X. I'm not going to include extras, just going to include X here. So this is pretty good. But again, you can see that like my screen, here's my UI. It's in 3D and it's way out in world space. It looks like massive like this. And that doesn't help me. So what you can do to fix this problem, to make it easier for you, is go into the canvas element. So left click on the canvas element of your in your hierarchy. And on the right hand side, instead of screen space overlay, which would work, right? I want you to change this to screen space camera. Okay, camera. And then what you want to do is you want to pull in the camera from the main camera So this main camera here, you just want to drag and drop it into the screen space camera. Okay, that's what you're going to do. And then if I double click on the canvas, if I, kind of frame select the canvas, then we should see that the camera itself is where the canvas is. So if I look back at the main camera, so here's my main camera, and you can see that this is what we're seeing here. This is what the camera sees, right? Then the canvas and the camera is the exact same. I can kind of see what the camera sees. And then at the bottom left here is where you can get a sense of what that looks like. So here's what this looks like right here. And then here is what this looks like right here. Problems with this approach. Let's talk about this. So positives and negatives. Positives, you can actually look at the screen and then you can see the actual user interface element right here. That's where it is. But the problem with that approach is that you have to look at it in terms of whatever, it's kind of tied to the camera. So whatever the camera is looking at, the camera gizmo is what you're seeing here in the game. So let's just move in so you can see kind of what this looks like in the game, so you understand. All right, so this is that approach. So you can do that. My problem is when I do this, then in the game, you can see that the UI is actually hidden, right? And why? Because we haven't given, because we're using a screen space camera UI for the canvas, then it doesn't have, the sorting layer is the exact same, right? So that's why it's a negative thing to do it this way, at least in 3D. If I also can make it world space, that's also an option. And that means that the canvas, if I look at the canvas itself, is literally hanging in world space, right? Like wherever I put it, right? So it's nothing to do with the camera anymore, but it's physically in world space. Like it'll actually, if I remove the camera, it'll actually just sit there wherever the user interface is. It'll just stay there in world space, right? For us, we're going to go back to screen space overlay, so you can see what this looks like again. And the good reason why we want to do this is because it doesn't mess with our view. All right, so the camera has nothing to do with what we're seeing, right? So this is kind of the where we had our view look at, and so you can see that this is where it is. You can see now that the object is above everything else, because screen space overlay, what it does, it kind of is an overlay on top of everything else. It's kind of higher up than everything else in the game world. So this is the right way to do it. But the only thing is that we have to visualize what our canvas looks like in 3D. So here, the easy way to do that is if you click on this little 2D button, see this little 2D button, click onto it. And then if I double click on my canvas, we can see that this is the canvas. All right, so this is a way of doing it too. If similarly, we could do this. Let me switch back again to screen space camera. And if I drag and drop the camera back in there, and if I double click on the canvas in 2D, right? So this is the canvas in 2D. You can see that the canvas is here, but the table is way over there. And the canvas is like reversed, right? Just to show you what this looks like. It's really weird, actually, just because the way we did it. So that's why I wouldn't recommend it right now with the way we're doing it. Go back to screen space overlay, which is the right thing to do. And by the way, if just get rid of the reference to the screen space camera here, which is not a great thing to do. All right. So just go back to screen space overlay, no reference, double click on the canvas, which will give you a sense of what this looks like. So we want this thing. So where do we want this selector to be? One way to do this so you can visualize both things is side by side. So you can take the game panel and then pull it down so it's kind of a side by side that looks like this, right? So you can visualize the canvas and the actual game next to each other or on top of each other. You can make it so that maybe the thing is on top and the table's at the bottom. It's whatever you feel like. So again, what I'm saying is maybe you want to take this game and put it on the bottom of this one so you can actually see what the canvas looks like here. And again, all I'm doing is I went to 2D mode, and that's how I got this way. If I went out of 2D mode, it looks like this. If I click on 2D mode and double click on the canvas, we're seeing an orthographic representation of the canvas in 2D, right? I'm zooming back out here so you can see that. Okay, there it is. I can zoom back out and you can see the canvas here, right? You can also do something called frame select, which is when you're in the edit mode in the scene, if you press the F key, it'll kind of bring forward the object that you're looking at. So again, if I was going to click on, let's say my card, let's say I click on the ace of clubs here, and if I press F, it's going to bring me right to the ace of clubs. Now I'm in 2D. If I switch to 3D, you can see that it's exactly where the ace of clubs is. And if I click on the diamond, ace of diamonds, and I press F, it's going to just, slot me over to that card, right? Right in front of it, right? So similarly, if I go back to 2D, and if I click on the canvas and press F, then I'm going to see the entire canvas, and it's like, right away in this little screen. I think this is probably an easier way to work. And this way you can see where the canvas is and the user interface. And you can kind of make it larger so you can see kind of a one-to-one of what this looks like compared to where I'm putting it. So should I put my drop down here for difficulty? Remember, I don't want to occlude or, kind of hamper what's here in my screen. Screen space, kind of real estate is precious. And I want to take up the least amount of space as possible. So maybe the top right corner or the top left corner might be a good place for difficulty. Your choice. Where do you want me to put it? Top left or top right? What are your thoughts? Let's do it together. And we'll talk about how to do this. Top left or top right? Or do you prefer another position? What are your thoughts, guys? Top left. Okay, we're going to go with that. Justin, so the way we do is we would, in this view, in the edit view, we click on the item. This is the item. You can see that the drop down is here, right? And what we want to do is at the top, you can see that I've got this, which is the move tool. I want to select the move tool. And I'm going to move this item using the handles, the control handles here. Notice that it happens here in real time as well. I'm just going to move the item until it's kind of near the top. And there's also this little square that's kind of at the bottom where you can move things anywhere you like. I'm going to move this kind of towards the top part of the screen, like this. And so here is this top part of the screen. And what I want to do with this drop down, right, is we have to configure it a little bit in a second. One thing is that all items that are UI items are similar to regular game objects in Unity, in that they have a transform, but it's a special transform called a rect transform. The rect transform only is available in a user interface canvas, right? That's what it is. And you have a little, like almost like what looks like a target here. Please click on that target. That target is going to tell you the anchor for this particular user interface item, right? So right now the anchor, if you look at it it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at it, the anchor is kind of in the middle of the canvas. So it's relative to the middle. That's what these coordinates give you, relative to the middle. We don't want that. We want this user interface item to be relative to the top left corner of the screen. So to do that, I'm going to click on this little rect transform for the drop down, and I'm going to pick the top left corner. And when I do that, you can see now that there's a little anchor that shows up here. Why would I want to do that? If I want this thing to retain the same shape, if I'm putting it on a mobile device, or if I'm putting it on WebGL, or even on PC, and I want the same kind of reference, it's the top left corner that I'm going to use, okay? So this is the top left corner. This is awesome. And then I can specify from the top left corner the X position and the Y position. Let's make it some better numbers than 108 and minus 47. Let's make it minus 50, right? So as a number, and let's make it something like either 100. Let's see what 100 looks like. Maybe less than, if I want to do that, then I want to put it even higher up. Let's make it a little bit more. Like if I went to 150, what does that look like? That's too much, 50 and 150. So let's cut it back to, let's say 125. And let's make it so that this is minus, let's see what minus 25 looks like. That's too little. And how about something like minus 35? How about, it's actually, like I'm just trying to balance it off here. Where I want it is something like here. That might be a good place. And that looks like minus 40 for me and 105. That's where I want to put mine. 105 and minus 40. Okay. Now the drop down, how does it work? Because we have to configure the drop down. So the drop down is an element that has a few options. So for example, I have option A and some kind of sprite if I want, option B and some kind of sprite if I want, and option C, and some kind of sprite if I want. It's totally up to me if I want to have different sprites here or not, right? And we can select the default option as well if we want to. So option A, let's think about this as easy, or as an example. And option B would be standard. And option C is hard. Okay, so this is hard. And going with what I just said here, easy, normal, and hard. Let's call this normal just to make sure that this is it. And we also can kind of specify the matrix. So, kind of a 2x4 matrix. So 2x4. So 2x4 matrix, right? And we can say that normal is a 4x4 matrix. Oops. 4x4 matrix. And the other one is a 6x6 matrix. It's pretty crazy. I don't even know how we're going to do it here. We're going to try it. 6x6 matrix. Okay, there it is. So that's easy, medium, and hard, right? Easy, normal, and hard. I call it normal. And what happens if you change the value from these options? Then the value right now is 0 by default. All right, that's what it's going to show. So if I press play, right, as an example, I press play, then you can see that by default, it says easy, right? And if I go here, I can select normal, or I can select hard. So that's how you can make the selector work. And you can see that in real time, what is happening. But easy is looking like what it is. Now, here's the great thing about, I'm going to stop this now. Here's the great thing about this. The dropdown has a few different things here. It has a label, right? Which is whatever this is going to be, right? And the label can be configured as well. So you can configure the label so that it is bold, right? Instead of just the regular label. You can change the font size. You can do a lot of different things here that you did before to adjust this thing. That's the dropdown. The arrow, you can change the arrow image, because the arrow by default, it uses a drop-down arrow asset. So you can see what that looks like. That's a little arrow asset. You can replace that. It's very customizable. And there's also something called a template, right? Where the template uses a viewport and a content and items, for background and all this kind of stuff that kind of appear and disappear when you don't need them. So this is all the stuff that's kind of hidden away that it uses, that drop-down thing uses for you to change stuff, okay? So that's what the drop-down works. The drop-down has the front level, which gives you this thing, and the default is easy. And again, if I was to run this thing, it's pretty good. Now, if you think this is good enough, and again, if you make this bigger, this is what it would look like here. And sometimes notice that the arrow is right here, and it's like a big selection. And what we want to do is you want to go into the canvas. So this is where you can kind of move into here for a second. And here is the actual item. And what you can do is you can make this longer or wider, right? Now, one thing that you have on the right-hand side is set native size. I would caution you against this. So set native size would be weird sometimes to use. One thing that you can also do is for the label, right? The label itself. Notice that there's also something called auto size. So the bigger you make this object, then the bigger the label is going to be. So if I click on auto size in here, then it becomes pretty massive in terms of what this looks like. So it kind of, I'm just showing you some options here. So that's the label. I went to, again, I clicked on auto size, and it says size options is from 0 to 0, min max. We want the minimum size that we had for 14. So 14 would be the minimum size. And then maximum size, you want to put to something like 72 or something, right? And that's what you'd want to do if you could choose that. But in this case, even if I put a number in here, as an example, so maximum is 72, minimum, you could say 14. So 14 to 72, you put these numbers in there. And then what it does is if I change the size of my drop-down item, and you can do that by going to this little rect transform tool. If I change the size of my drop-down item, then the label size will also change to match. So I can say, well, the maximum size is going to be 72. it'll make it bigger. And this is important to do. So I'm just gonna undo those changes. But I do want to make it a large enough so I can see my my little arrow. I think this is a good from a design perspective. Okay. And give a little bit of room here in the label so you can see the stuff that it looks like. Okay, awesome. So now if I run this code, again, let's go back to what this looks like. And if I run this code here, you can see that it's something that I can easily select, right? And it kind of allows me to do whatever the easy, medium, and hard difficulty is, easy, normal, and hard. Okay, let's make the event happen for this. And so we can show what all these do. And by the way, one other thing to note is normal is a much bigger word than easy, right? So if I go normal, you can see normal takes up more space and it almost crosses into the arrow here, almost. It's almost like I got to make it just a little bit wider to accommodate normal, all right? So again, what I mean by that is we know that normal is coming, right? And what we can do is I can make this a little bit wider to know that, to kind of accommodate that ahead of time. So it's going to accommodate the size of this thing and not try and scrunch it in, you know, into that space. So something like this. So right now my width is about 203. Let's make it 205. So it's exactly, my height is 30. That's if you want to do what I'm doing here, to 205 by 30. And let's see if that makes any sense. So if I go back, then if I run this thing, then you can see what that kind of looks like here. I know I'm spending time doing this, but guys, we need to do just mechanical things like this so you understand how it works. Okay, good. Now let's make it so that it works. So how do we script it so that it works? So some strategies for this, okay? When it comes to scripting, it's kind of similar to scripting anything else. We can attach a script to control the dropdown somewhere in my, in my code. There's a couple of ways to do this. One is to attach to the game controller. Like right now, the game controller script does some things, but we can make the game controller script, the game controller object host something else called a UI controller, which I recommend because it's going to control all of our UI. So again, I'm going to go into scripts and I'm going to make a brand new C# script. We're going to call this UI controller. Here's a UI controller. And let's see if we can make this go. All right, so I want to take this UI controller and I'm going to, kind of attach it to the game controller. So the game controller has already a script. You can attach multiple scripts on an object. I can take this UI controller and drag and drop it on. No problem. There it is. And then if I just double click on UI controller, it'll bring up my Visual Studio 2022. Now, you know what's going to happen. I'm going to have to wait for ReSharper to do its dance, which is it's going to initialize and all that kind of stuff in a second. If you've been using ReSharper, you can see that that's what it does. Most of you have not used it, and that's okay. And you can see what's happening. It's kind of taking control of my system. There it is. And it says configure settings to improve performance, but it doesn't really matter. Like it's going to take time for it to do it. And then it's going to give me back control in a second. All it's doing is it's setting up ReSharper. So it's going to give me a more intelligent, there's also an update, looks like, for Unity or for Visual Studio, which I'll do another time. There we go. All right, so I've got this. And what I want to do is, for now, for this UI controller, what I want to do is put together a public void, and we're going to say on difficulty level selected or difficulty level changed. That's what we're going to call it. So we're going to say on difficulty changed. So the changed event. That's how we're going to name it. When the difficulty changes, I want to show the difficulty. Now, in order for me to do this, I need to get a reference to the dropdown. That's what we need to do. Okay, so back to this. I need to get a public reference. So public reference to a dropdown. Okay, so notice when I put dropdown, it says Unity Engine UI. I need to include Unity Engine UI to do that. But we also know that the dropdown, which is of type Unity Engine UI, is also some other options. Take a look at some of this stuff. Now we know this is a TMP dropdown because This is not just a regular UI dropdown. It's a TMP because we're using Text Mesh Pro. So let's get that Text Mesh Pro TMP dropdown, which includes something called using TM Pro. That's what it does. And we're just going to call this the difficulty. If you really want to be specific, the difficulty dropdown. Okay, just to make it something that makes sense. Difficulty dropdown. Save. And once I've done that, if I go back to Unity, so again, all I have is this in my script, difficulty dropdown, and this empty thing right here. Then inside of my game controller, you can see that there's a reference to the difficulty dropdown. What I want is I want to automatically find this reference right in the canvas element, right? So I want to kind of go into the canvas element and find the dropdown. That's what I want. And we know that the dropdown has a Text Mesh Pro dropdown. And the way to know that is if I take the dropdown and drag and drop it, you can see that it computes. It's good to go. Let's just erase that. I'm just going to press delete and erase that dropdown. So we know that that's what I'm looking for, a Text Mesh Pro dropdown, where I can look for an item in the scene that has that. Back to this. So I can say something in the start method. I can say something like difficulty dropdown is equal to find object of type. And I want to find the object that is a TMP dropdown in the scene. And there should only be one because we're not going to do more than one dropdown for now, right? So that's what this does. So difficulty dropdown is the thing that we made. We made a reference to the TMP dropdown we made it public so we can see it and troubleshoot. We don't need to make it public later on. We're doing it right now. And we're using find object of type, and we're trying to find the script that's attached to the object and make a reference to it. Save. And if I go back to run it for a second, let's just run this thing. Then what I'm looking for is that this thing fills up with the difficulty dropdown. Look at that, how it found the dropdown automatically here inside the canvas. This is important. So for me to be able to find that canvas dropdown. Awesome.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't, like, this was like a while back, but I can't add the UI controller to the game controller, like object.
Okay, the way to do that, there's a couple ways. One way to do it, let's just remove mine, remove. One you can do it is you can click add component, and then you can just do UI controller, type it in and just add it this way. Okay, that's a way of doing it. You can also, that's the second way. The other way is if you take the script UI controller and just drag it on top of the button. So it kind of lights up the button like this. Okay, that's the way of doing it. And the third way,
that's what I've tried to do.
So if you can't do it this way, if it doesn't work,
it says it can't, like, the script class cannot be found.
Can't find UI controller.
Yeah, like I put it in, like I drag and drop it in, and it says it can't find the script class.
Is the name of the file the same as the name of the class?
I'm assuming so.
Well,
Because I've had that issue before where they like the name difference for some reason mattered in Unity.
this is what it is, actually. I'll tell you what it is. You're so quick that Unity didn't finish compiling and adding it properly. That's what it is. So here's what I recommend. Delete UI controller completely, delete it, right? Then add it back in and wait for Unity to do this compilation step. So okay, example, if I was to add in a random script, let's watch this. If I go create C# script, and if I go random script, right? Watch, I'm gonna erase this in a second. See that right there? That completing domain, and hold on and do that. Let Unity do that first. If you did it too quick and you dragged and dropped it too fast or touched it even, sometimes it's enough to cause a problem. Let's get rid of random script now. If I just click delete, it will delete my script and it'll move it out. What happens is, see how it reloads everything again? It revamps or recompiles the entire project right away. Okay.
I'm not sure that's the issue, because I just created a test script, waited for it to compile, and it didn't do it. It didn't solve the issue.
Did it compile though?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did, because like I don't get like a pop-up that tells me it's compiling, but I waited like a good like minute or two.
And if you click on UI controller, does it show you this?
Yes, it does, and
Okay,
it opens just fine.
Try again. Try going to game controller and then clicking add component and adding it in this way. By typing it in UI controller. Try that.
It doesn't even pop up there.
Okay. The next step is delete UI controller and restart Unity. I'm not joking, right? Again, these are weird problems, but it can happen. I'm sorry. Because what's
Well-
happening is UI controller, the script, somehow Unity's putting it inside the wrong folder, or it's not actually being referenced properly in Unity. And that might just be a problem with the Unity loading again. And so you may have to just reload the project.
The thing
Oh,
is,
wait,
this is what's happening with game controller that we created like last week.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, the same problem is found there. So like even if I restart the entire program, like it didn't work last time. So I don't know if it'll work this time.
You didn't connect your game controller. You couldn't do that either.
Yeah, I couldn't do that either.
Huh. I wonder if you can just grab my code from, that's what I recommend, because we have my code from GitHub. Grab my code and start your project fresh. This way it's like my code. And if my
Alright.
code works, it should work from your code. That's what I recommend. Let me give you the GitHub repo link, which you should have, but here it is. It's GitHub. And if you look at Canadore College, then there's going to be my ICEs, right? And if you look at my ICEs here, there you can see that there's ICE 3. I haven't put up ICE 4 yet, but I'm going to do that in a second. Just grab the, download this whole folder. It'll give you all of them, and then copy ICE 3 into another folder and make it ICE 4. And then start from there.
All right.
That's what I recommend. That's why I share my stuff with you anyway. All right, so while you're doing all that, I'm going to just continue a little bit. So UI controller, what it did was it kind of made a reference, and I got that. And what I want to do is I want to, for my dropdown, here's my dropdown. I want to connect it to my dropdown. So on the bottom of the dropdown, there's this thing that says on value changed. And then down here, if I click plus, right, you can see that it listens for a value. Okay, so it listens for something to put in there. And I can drag and drop my game controller that has, well, it doesn't have it now. Let's add it back in. Let's add my UI controller back to my game controller. And my game controller has a reference to a, I made that other file, which is, so then my other function, which is called on difficulty change. That on difficulty change, because it's public, will be exposed through the UI controller, and we should be able to see it in Unity when I pull it into the dropdown. So here in the dropdown, I know there's kind of a few steps, but in the dropdown, there's this little space down here. And what I want to do is take the game controller that already has the UI controller attached to it, right? And I want to drag and drop it into this space right here, okay? And when I do that, I could pull down the function, and you can see that when I pull the function down, it shows me the UI controller script, and then I can literally go to on difficulty changed. I can actually select the function, okay? On difficulty changed. If I click the function on difficulty changed, then whenever I change this, it actually uses the function that I just wrote as a handler. Okay. So back to the code. This is the on difficulty changed, and I have access to the difficulty dropdown. The difficulty dropdown is a dropdown, right? And it has some stuff. It has the item image, the item text, the on value changed. So the dropdown event, right? It has options, right? So whatever the options list is, and the value, whatever the value is. Okay, so let's show the value. This is the value of the dropdown. And what I want to do is I want to output it. So I'm going to say print the value of the dropdown, right? When I change the item. Let's see what that item, the value is. Okay. So again, and I want to think about what this is. It's an integer value, 0, 1, 2, whatever it's going to be is, right? So this is pretty cool. So then what I want to do is I want to go back to here, right? And then I want to run the code, and I'll go back to that in a second for everybody. And when I select the difficulty, take a look here at the console. If I go, I want to select my difficulty as normal, then you can see that the value is 1. So if I change my difficulty back to 0, the value goes back to 0. So easy is 0, normal is 1, and then hard is 2, right? You can see the hard is 2. So it actually picks up these values, which is pretty cool. Very straightforward, very easy in terms of how it works, okay? So if that's true, then it'd be nice if we had a difficulty enumeration where 0 is equal to 1, normal is equal, sorry, 0 is equal to easy, 1 is equal to normal, and 2 is equal to hard, all right? And you can have other difficulties as well. So from an enumeration, it's an enum class that we would make. Let's do that next. So save. I'm going to go back into my code and I'm going to make a brand new enum, new C# script, which we're going to call difficulty, right? So that's the difficulty. And the difficulty is not going to be of type mono behavior. I kind of mentioned this last time that mono behavior is you need this class to attach the script to your game object. But we can actually not use this class if I'm making an enumeration. So if I go and I want to make an enumeration, I can just remove all this stuff. I can change the public class to an enum called difficulty. And the enum enumeration, I can specify what values that we have there. And I want to usually put them in caps. So for example, things like easy, normal, and hard, okay? And you can see that if I hover over, I get easy is equal to 0, normal is equal to 1, and hard is equal to 2. It's automatic, that's what enums do. Enums or enumerations exist in most languages, most modern languages, in some form or another. One thing I want to do, because I want to use this enumeration everywhere in my code, is I want to annotate it here at the top with a system.serializable, which is going to make sure that my enum class is available everywhere. Okay, that's my enum. Save. So I got two classes or two scripts I just wrote. I wrote a very simple UI controller here, and I also wrote a separate difficulty enum here. Okay. And so what I want to do is I want to specify that by default, the difficulty that we're going to set is whatever the difficulty value normally starts off at. So let's make it so that the difficulty is an object that we can see in the inspector. So I'm going to say public difficulty, and we're going to call it difficulty, right? And we're going to set the difficulty to, by default, easy. And we're going to do that by saying something like the difficulty is, wow, the difficulty is equal to easy by default. That's what we're going to set it to. And that's going to be in start. Start, remember, initializes everything once, and then update changes things regularly. Most likely, for my UI controller, I'm not going to need my update function, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Remember, we want to get rid of functions that don't do anything in our code. All right, so now, instead of changing the difficulty here as an example, manually, we want to change it with, when we select the dropdown, I want the on difficulty changed event to change the difficulty here that we're recording in the UI controller. And the way to do this is to do something like what we did before. We're going to say something like difficulty is equal to the difficulty value. But the problem with this is that the value is an integer, right? And the difficulty is a difficulty type, right? So we need to convert this to a difficulty type. So how do I convert? If I click onto it, it tells you, it says cast a difficulty or change type of field from difficulty to int. I want to change this one, cast a difficulty, right? So if I do that, it looks like this. So I cast it as a difficulty. This is just a regular C# type cast. I'm casting the value that we're getting from our pull down, which is an integer value, to a value that makes sense in the difficulty. Okay, so that's what I want. Save.
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt again, but what's the link to the GitHub repository? I can't find it anywhere. I thought it'd be on the Discord server or something.
Sorry. I didn't know that you didn't have it. Let me just it's this one. I'll put it in the chat. And you know what? Since we're talking, since you don't know where it is, I'm going to put that in the resources. So I'm going to say that under resources, or maybe, yeah, okay, I put that, I'll pin it there. So I'll say this is the GitHub link, GitHub, and I'll say that is, I'll say GitHub link for the course. Right, and then what we'll do is we'll pin this up so we can, you can always find that in resources. Okay,
All right, thank you very much.
no problem. All right, so back to this then. So going back to what we were doing, then what I want to do is when I select my difficulty, then what I'm hoping to do is in the game controller, it's going to show me this thing change. Notice that difficulty becomes a drop down here, easy, normal, hard. And what I want is when I select something here, I want this thing to be selected as well. Let's try it. So press play. And then, and there's a motive to my madness, right? So here's easy. And if I go into normal, you can see that normal changes here. And if I go here into hard, then hard changes here. Why do I want this? Because now I can use this value in my code. Okay, I can use it anywhere I want. I can go to UI controller, difficulty, and I can read that value. And whatever that value is, that's how it's going to generate everything else in my game controller when I use my game controller. Okay, this is good. This is a good step. Let's put this up on GitHub. So this is the first time we're accessing GitHub for this project. I'm going to use my command prompt. I'm going to go CD space, and I'm going to pull up my the path to my stuff, which is under my desktop, in this case, under Canador, and then ICES. And I want to drag and drop, my containing folder, which is the ICES folder, this one. And then I'm going to kind of go in here and go git add dot, git commit -m, and I'm going to say added project files for ICE4, and then git push. I'm doing it here with a command prompt, but you can always do it with Visual Studio, which I've done before in the past. Notice that down here, you can see that the GDD403 W2023 ICES is here as well. Okay. If I take a look at my repository now, if I go refresh, you can see that I have my ICE4 repository in there too. And you can see that it updated everything for ICE4. Okay. Wonderful. This is what I want. And I've got this going on. I've got my user interface item. And this user interface item is the first of a bunch that I want to use. It'd be nice if it mentioned difficulty somewhere as well. So one thing we can do in the canvas is we can add in a label. So I'm going to go right click and I'm going to go to UI and I'm going to add in a text, which is of type text mesh pro. So text, there it is. You can see new text appears in the middle of my screen, and we're just going to go back to this view for a second. Here's my new text, and my new text is going to be the text that's going to tell me the difficulty. It's going to tell me what the difficulty is. So I'm going to take my text and let's call this the difficulty label. Difficulty label. I'm just changing it in the hierarchy. So it says difficulty label. It's just a text object. And here inside where it says new text, I'm going to select, I'm just going to type in difficulty, just so that it's more descriptive. And I'm going to take my difficulty label. And what I'd like to do is put it next to or above my difficulty dropdown, something that makes sense. So again, I'm just going to select my label here in the Unity editor, and I'm going to use my move controls to move the difficulty so where I want it. Now it's pretty big, right? And if I wanted to make it this big, that's okay. But what I need to do is give myself space, right? So that maybe the difficulty label goes there. And then what I want is the difficulty dropdown to be lower. So let's do that. Let's move it a little bit lower than where it was. So again, I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Take my difficulty label and move it across and up. And again, just like we did before, I want to get a reference to the top left corner of the screen for my difficulty label. So I'm going to go into my canvas, my rect transform, and I'm going to select my anchor. I'm going to select the top left corner of my screen. There it is. And that is going to be my difficulty labels anchor, top left corner. Let's give it some real values that make sense for us. And again, this is pretty big. What you can do, if I zoom in, we don't have to make it quite this large. We can make it so that we put auto size on again. This is a good step. If I click on auto size on my label, you can see that it's pretty big. It actually grows even bigger. What we want to do is we want to make this thing smaller. So I'm going to use the rect tool, and I'm going to go here and I'm just going to scrunch it up so that it's kind of makes sense in terms of size. I think something like what we had before, which is a height of 30, might be a good size for this thing altogether. And you can see that it's not centered, like the value of the label is not centered in any way. So height is 30, width is 200. I don't really need it to be a width of 200, but I'm going to leave it there for now. And then I'm going to say that the X position is going to match the X position of my dropdown. My X position for my dropdown right now is 126, right? That's the X position. Let's make it so that the X position for my dropdown is 130, right, to make it even. And I'm going to go back to my label, my difficulty label here. And I'm going to say that the difficulty label is also going to be 130. So you can see that that is kind of aligned, both of those two things. And then from a Y position, let's make it some minus 30. That's where that's going to be. And then my difficulty dropdown is going to be something under that. Let's just use our keys to kind of put them closer together. Something that looks like this. And you can see that I come to like something like minus 65. That looks like a good value. So difficulty minus 65. If you think the difficulty label is too big, and I think it might be, we can also make it smaller. So again, we can modify this just a little bit more, just so that way it's not taking up how big it's going to be. And if you really want to specify more detail, you can say game difficulty. So game difficulty, if you want to be, that's why I left it that big. And then easy, medium, hard. This is a label. This is the interactive thing that you're going to interact with. And you can see that if I look at my my difficulty label size, we can make it something like 25. That's a good, so a round value, a real value is what I want to say. And then the Y position would change too. We want to make it something like minus 25. That's pretty good. Where we can move our drop down a little higher up a little bit. And I'll give you all these numbers in a second. I'm just, playing with these so that it's a little bit closer and nicer. We have a limited space here on the left that we want everything to be. And that's why I'm changing this. Now, I think I want to make this minus 55. There we go. So now let's go through the numbers. Okay, so my difficulty label is at 130 on the X and minus 25 on the Y relative to the top left corner of the screen. I've chosen that as the rect transform. And then the anchor, and then the width and the height is 225, right? 200 on the width, 25 on the height. And then from my drop down, it's 130 on the X and minus 55 in the Y relative to the top left corner. And it's 205 width and 30 height. So if you wanted to make it exactly like mine, you can see that this is what it looks like. You may choose to have other, coordinates. All right, wonderful. So I've got a couple things we talked about from a UI item. I have a difficulty label perspective. Let's make it higher up. We're just moving it higher up on the order in the canvas, or whatever, however you see it here. It's not required, but I'm putting it just from a organization, call it whatever you like, perspective. This is pretty good. And then what I want to do now is I want to add in some buttons, like, for example, start the game, reset the game, that kind of stuff, right? And how it works. So let's do that. Let's add a start button. So again, I'm clicking on the canvas, and then I'm right clicking on the canvas and I'm going UI, and I want to go to button text mesh pro. And then you can see that the button goes in the middle of the screen here. We're going to call this the start button. Here it is, start button. And then I want to just go back to this so I can see where the button is. And I want to do the same thing. I want the button to be relative to the top left corner of the screen. So again, I'm going to go to the start button and click on this and click on the top left corner. So you can see now that with respect to the button, the anchor is the top left corner of the screen. And again, what I want to do is I want to move it over. So 130 was the number. We know that, right? And then we want to move it to some point just underneath the screen here. And maybe 130 will be the wrong number now because the size of the button is different than the size of the drop down. So then we'll bring it to the left so that you can see that their left margin is pretty good in terms of sizing. There it is. And you can see that the X position seems like, 110 probably is a good size or something like that, a good place, 110, or even like what we had, maybe 105. Let's take a look, maybe even 108. Now, why is this happening? Why is this number different than this number, right? Because we have it set up. Well, the pivot is in the middle of the button, right? That's the pivot. If you wanted the pivot to be the top left corner of the button, then you can choose that. You can say, well, the pivot now is the 0, 0 point of the button. And if you did that, then, and 0, 0 point is right here, then you would have an actual value for your X position, where X position is 28, right? 28. And I can do the same thing for the difficulty dropdown. This difficulty dropdown, the pivot is 0.5. I can change that to 0 and 0, and you can see that, well, the position is actually 27.5. It's not really great in terms of positioning. We can make it exact. This is relative to the top left corner. So let's make it so that these two match exactly. And so I can kind of select both of them. And then from a top left position perspective, we can put it at wherever we want, like 28, right? So now they're exactly on top of each other, like exactly on kind of positioned this way. And same thing with the difficulty label. Difficulty label, the pivot is 0, 0.5 and 0.5. I can do the same thing where I can say that the position on the y-axis is 28, right? So you can say that that is all on top of each other. But 28 is a weird number, and I'm just going to select them all. And what if I wanted to put them at 30? That's okay, right? That's a pretty good number, 30, right? Now I can change them all back to the same pivot that we had before, 0.5 and 0.5. And you're going to see that all of those numbers are going to be different because now it's the middle pivot that is going to change the entire thing. But now we know this is completely aligned. So this is our tricks we can use to align things and then change back to our middle pivot. The reason why we want to use a middle pivot sometimes, if I want to rotate an item, you can do that. The pivot itself tells you where this thing is going to be kind of anchored relative to itself, which is kind of a really great way of controlling UI items. All right, so we want to make this button, happen, and kind of we want to have a start and a stop button. We want to have a reset button. We want to have all these things, and we can add color. We can do all these things. For now, I want to kind of select the button, and I want to put it up a little bit closer to my item, right? So relative to the other one, and this is something like I'm saying -90 here, right? Relative to the other item. Okay. So game difficulty, easy, and then the button, and we should kind of change inside the button itself. There's going to be a little text item, and we can check this button. So it's going to say start. Start. We could make it a blue button, right? So how do we make it a different color button? So I'm going to go not to the text value, that's the label of the button, but I want to go to the start button itself, and we can change that the normal color is something like blue, right? So what if I did that? If I change the normal color to blue, well, this can work out okay. Maybe a nicer color than that, something like a little bit different. Maybe you like a different color blue. I'm just looking at the actual thing itself here. Maybe even here, a little bit brighter. Something like that looks like that. That's not bad. This kind of blue color. I'll give you the color value in a second. So from a color value perspective, my blue is going to be something like hexadecimal wise. Sorry, it's being blocked by my mic. 1C79FF is the hexadecimal values if you wanted to match my color with yours, just in case you want to do that. So here it is. That's the hexadecimal value for the color, right? And then what you want to do is you don't want to leave the text black because black text on blue is bad for contrast. You never want to do that. So you want to change your text color, the text color itself. Instead of it being the vertex color being black, you can change the vertex color to white, actually, which makes it so it's a nicer looking color, right? So white vertex color. Nice. So start button. Yay, right? All right, so now that I have a start button and I put it into place and it looks like a nice blue color, then what I can do is I can take this start button, and when I click the start, I can start my game. I can do the things that I want it to do. I need another event, another UI controller. All right, so let's go back to my UI controller, double click. And just like I had this on difficulty changed, I want an on start button pressed. Okay, I want to do that. So let's make a new event, public void on start button pressed, right? There it is. And then what we want to do is nothing for now. We don't want to do anything yet, but we want to change whenever I click on the button, I want this thing to react. So I'm just going to say, let's do a print statement. We'll say start button pressed, right? Print is like a debug.log. And then what I want to do is inside of the application, right? The Unity app, I want to go and do the same trick I did with the drop-down menu. I want to go into start button, and I want to go down here where it says the on click event. I want to add a plus here, and I'm going to drag and drop my game controller on top of this. So the game controller is the thing that houses the UI controller. And I'm going to go where it says no function here. I'm going to click onto it and go down to the UI controller. And then I'm going to go to on start button pressed. That links the button to the handler that I just wrote. Okay, that's what that does. And then if I press play, whenever I click that button, it's going to output the button was pressed. Watch. So click, right? And you can see that that increments. Now, there's a couple things, right? One thing is, as soon as I press the button, it kind of turns white. I don't like that. It's kind of like a highlighted color. I got to have a different highlighted color than this altogether. And this is color tinting at its best, right? I can do color tinting. I can do sprite swapping. I can do animation, make a little animation happen with the button. Really lots of control here. Maybe what I do is when I click the hover, so if I hover over this thing, so I'm back to here. If I hover over, this is the kind of like a highlighted color when I'm hovering, then I want the highlighted color to be different. So maybe the highlighted color will be whatever this color is, this color, right? That color there, but maybe a little bit lighter. So let's make it lighter colors. So like this. So that's the highlighted color. Again, all I did was I used my eyedropper tool to this. And now we can test it here in Unity. So we can go here and go, well, that's kind of what it looks like, almost like a lighter color when I hover over, right? And if I want to capture this value, I can just click into there, and then you can capture the value here by just copying this, right click, copy. And then when I stop Unity, right, I can go in there and apply the color changes here. So I can say that that is the hover color, right? Cool. And we can have another color when I'm pressing the button. So let's try this again. So if I run it, I'm showing you these things just in case you don't know them. I'm assuming you don't, okay? Then if this is pretty good on hover, but what if I click it? I don't want it to go light again, right? And the selected color is different than everything else. There's a couple of additional ones. So pressed color should be darker, and the selected color should be maybe a lighter color, right? So let's go into my pressed color, and I want to kind of look at, I'm going to take my eyedropper tool and just select my, actually, let's do that again. So here's my regular color. Let's just stop it. Right, there you go. And then I want to go into my pressed color, and I want to go into my eyedropper tool and go into the scene here, anywhere, even here or here, anywhere in the scene, in the screen. And I want to click this button, and that's my regular color. What I want is for this color to actually be darker. So I kind of drag it to the right and maybe down a little bit. So a darker color when I'm pressing onto it. And again, this value is going to be something like 004589, copy this one. And then what I can do is, let's test it and see if it works right. So I'm going to go in here and test it. So that's what it looks like when it's selected, right? And let's put that inside of stop Unity and go into back into the editor, into the press color. And then what I want to do is just copy that value in there. And there we go. That's the press color. So see how we're making colors. And then the last one is the selected color. Selected color looks like it's kind of like the other color that I have, but maybe a little bit darker or something else, or maybe even the same color. It doesn't really matter, right, how you do it. So maybe we make it the same color. So that's easy. So we'll just kind of say, well, I want to take the same color for the selected value, this one. And I just want to, put that here in the selected color, okay? And then I can see that that's the same, right? So now if I play it, you can see that I have all those color tinting values and everything else in there, and I can click on start. If I click onto it, you can see it clicks and it goes back to this, and I can do this and it kind of goes back to what it looks like. So it looks pretty good. Okay. Save. Okay. And we got some information that the button was being clicked. Cool. I know I'm going slow, but I need to do this because without this stuff, you don't have any UI, and you need UI for your exam. You're going to need UI for your assignment too. You're going to need UI for everything else. And if you've never done this stuff, I'm not sure. Did you guys ever do this stuff with your other professors for Unity? Yes or no? I'm not sure. I don't want to waste too much more of your time, but I want to make sure you understand how to do this. Yes, no, maybe? I'm assuming no, but please let me know. All right. No. Okay. So now that we have our color and our the kind of this stuff here, again, some strategies would be, do you want to make this button the same size as this? Because then things are looking the same, because you see that there's a big drop down and then a smaller button. I mean, you can go crazy here with UI design. I'm not going to do that. You can, it's okay. This is fine, right? And then what I want, of course, is when we start the game, what is it going to do? We select our difficulty, and whatever the difficulty is, when we click the start button, it's going to deal a bunch of cards here based on the difficulty, okay? And then there should be some kind of reset button to reset the game, but the only way that it's going to reset the game is if I've lost or something like that. Okay, let's do the game. Back to this. The player can select the interface element and or use a button to shuffle the deck and deal a number of cards that meet the difficulty settings. That's the start button. The start button is going to shuffle the deck and deal a number of cards to meet the difficulty settings. Let's do this. Number 2. I'm trying to work through this with you, one step at a time, okay? That's what I'm doing to help you build your game. I can't do all of it. I'm going to do some of it, and you're going to do the rest, okay? Let's do it. So back to this. So what I want to do now is I want to start, when I click the start button, based on the difficulty that I've selected, and whatever is the difficulty inside of the UI controller, right? That's the difficulty that I've selected, right? So if I look at game controller, difficulty is easy. If the difficulty is easy, then I'm going to deal X number of cards. We need a shuffle function. Remember last time when we ran the code that we actually made 2 versions of the cards, right? We made a version of the cards that are kind of from clubs to spades, and then another version from clubs to spades. And we did that because, remember what we did was we created a copy of the cards, right? So the cards, if I look at the game controller, the game controller has a all that functionality in it. Let's take a look at the game controller and see what that does. So if I go to game controller, so I'll stop the file, go to game controller, and if I look here, it says standard deck is equal to a new standard deck. That's how it creates the standard deck. Let's take a look at the standard deck. So go to definition, and you can see that it's going to pull up my standard deck class, which is of type stack, a stack of game objects. Remember we did this? All right, so now we don't have a shuffle function. Is there a shuffle function built into the stack? Can we do that, right? Well, we're going to build a stack of cards in the build step. So we have loading, the load step. What it does is if I go here, it loads the cards in from the cards automatically, whatever the cards names are, it loads them in, and then it sets up each of the cards as an object, and it sets the parent to whatever the card parent is for the actual cards themselves. I save all this in cards prefabs. Card prefabs is a way of me resetting the deck later. Those things are going to stay in place forever, right? However, and they're all disabled, set active to false. However, what I do is after the load step is done, so that's initialize. So load is done, then initialize. Initialize says, let's make a copy of each of the cards and load them into the, I'm going to load them in place inside of the stack, right? So how do I shuffle the stack? I need a shuffle step. I want to take it so that I take these cards somehow, load them in somewhere and shuffle them, right? So I want to kind of load them somewhere and shuffle them and then assign them one for one into the stack. That's what I want to be able to do. So here I'm going for every card in card prefabs. I want a previous step to this, right? I want a previous step to this where I kind of copy them inside of somewhere temporarily, right? And then move them one step at a time inside of the stack, right? So again, we're talking about, kind of a shuffle step. So we don't have a shuffle. We don't have a way of shuffling the cards. And just to note, let's go and look at the stack game object, because we have a stack game object here. If I go right click and go to definition, it actually takes us to the definition. It'll actually pull it into from Microsoft, right? If you right click, it takes a time. So be wary of that. And it'll actually show you the structure here. So really what a stack is an array, and which is of stack type T, and it's an empty array. It has a size and a version, and there is a public stack function. You can actually look at all the different versions of the stack class here and all the stuff that stacks do, okay? But this is really not helpful for us. This is a decompiled version of the game, and I'm doing this with my JetBrains decompiler because I'm using ReSharper. Okay. Let's actually look at it online. So let's take a look and see what the stack offers us. So if I go C# stack, and I want to look at the Microsoft site, the Learn Microsoft Stack class, then the reason why I want to go here, it gives us examples of what the stack can do. It has the stack constructor, the count. This is the link. I'm just going to give you that on the code here. There it is. We've got the clear clone contains copy to array. I like that, right? Equals, get enumerated, get hash code, get type, peek, pop, push, right? We have all these things that I can do, and it goes from our stack to array, no problem. So we can go stack to array, which copies the stack to a new array if you really want to. So that's one thing it does. Cool. We have that. We also have a list. So we actually had in here a list of cards. So one thing that we did was, we don't show it here in the game controller, but we actually have in our code, we use a list of card prefabs to hold the list so that we can copy them over like we've done, right? So we already have this list. How about lists? Can the list be somehow shuffled, right? Let's see that. And that's okay. If the list, as long as we have all the cards on the list might be a way of shuffling the cards ahead of time. So I do a shuffle step, and then from the shuffle step, I take it and put it inside there. So let's see what list can do for us. So if I go back to list, so if I look at, if I search for list, then you can see that that didn't come up with anything. Let's go over here, list, C#, right? And I want to go back to that Learn Microsoft kind of site. Let's take a look at what all the list things, the stuff that lists can do. And again, if I scroll down, you can see all of the different things that it has. So I have a clear, a contains, a copy to, an ensure, an equals, kind of thing, and a get hash and a get type, and blah, 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 and remove and reverse. That's interesting. Sorts it automatically for me, which is pretty cool. And so this is neat, right? So we can do the sort stuff, array, toString, and trim access. And that's it. It doesn't really do stuff. It does a member-wise clone if I want to do it. And it looks at the last index and so on, but there really isn't any shuffle that it has by built in. But the reason why it's easy for me to shuffle a list, there's a couple ways. I could pop all the cards off into a stack and then push the cards back into my stack to create my shuffling algorithm. And the problem with that is that when I do it from the stack, it kind of pops everything off in last in, first out order. Whereas I can choose random elements from the list, and I can kind of create my stack randomly, right? Whereas I'm doing it completely like this, like a for loop, which is kind of linearly, right? Okay. So let's make a shuffle method. So I'm gonna kind of go down here at the bottom. We have a load. Let's make a shuffle method. So private void shuffle. And the shuffle method is going to create a shuffled list of cards where I shuffle the list that I have inside of a temporary list. And then I take that shuffled list and then I, kind of, paste it inside. I use that list itself. Okay. So there's a couple ways I could shuffle my prefabs and they're always going to be in shuffled order, which is not a bad thing, right? And that modifies the original list. Maybe that is the best way to go. So I want to shuffle the list, the prefabs list. So the prefabs list. Okay, that's how I do that. So how do I do that? Well, I want to create a swap function. Remember swap, how you work it? You want to kind of take one item and swap it with another random item. And you want to do it like, I don't know, 50 times or something like that. Like really good, like nicely shuffled, right? So I want to perform this shuffle a bunch of times. So let's say we'll make a for loop that goes from I to the card to the prefabs. I'll go through each card prefabs, kind of item. So card prefabs dot count. All right, so it kind of goes up to less than card prefabs count, prefabs, card prefabs. Okay, so I'm going to loop through all the cards, right? And then what I'm going to say is swap with a random other card, right? So I want to perform a swap with a random other card. So I'm going to say temp. So var temp, remember that swap function we saw? Var temp is equal to the card prefabs I. This is the one that I'm going to swap. And I'm going to swap this one, right? So card prefabs I. This is the swap function, right? I'm going to say that that is equal to a random object. So I'm going to say random object. So it's going to be random range. So underscore cards prefab, card prefabs, card prefabs. And then I want to say a random dot range from, this is inclusive, 0 to, right, the something like the the maximum amount. So card prefabs count. Okay, that's what I want to do. I'm swapping those things out, right, in place, and I'm randomly changing the amounts. I'm saying temp is equal to card prefabs I is equal to some random number, right? As an example, this is what this is happening. This is that card. So I'm kind of assigning this one, whatever the game object is where it is, I'm going to assign it to where it's at now. And then what I want to do is I want to say that, card prefabs, this, whatever the value was, I want to put this back, and I can't do it because it'll generate another value. So we want a random index. So say var, we'll say random index is equal to this. That's a little bit more reasonable. There we go. We'll take that random index and put it inside of this, right? So this is the random index. Then we'll use that same random index right here. We can say that underscore card prefabs random index is equal to temp. So this swaparama is the swap function that you saw in the code. So if I go back to the swap function that we saw here when I wrote it, back down here, this is exactly what we just did. Okay, this swap. And now it's giving me all these underlines. And this is like resharper at its best. It's going swap via deconstruction method in shuffle, right? So if I did that, and if I did the swap, it just does one of these. And this is kind of something that it says, well, this is another way of doing it where we say card prefabs I is equal to card prefabs random index, and card prefabs and random index is equal to card prefabs I. That is actually some syntax trickery the C# has built in because swapping is so common. And I did that by using resharper. It just coded it nicely for me, where it's basically saying, I'm just going to show you how this works. It goes, take this one and put it here, right? And take this one and put it here. That's the swap. It's called, I just call it syntax trickery, but that's what it is, right? Does that make sense? Swap. Okay, now what about if this is the same value? What if I and the random one that I chose from 0 to card prefabs count is the same? Nothing is happening, so we can check to see if that's true. We can say that, the only time we want to do that swapping is if I is not equal to the random index, right? If it's not equal to the random index, then swap. Otherwise, don't swap. Right? Because we just randomly rolled the same thing. It's going in the same spot. All right. And that's what the shuffle algorithm does. So it shuffles all the cards inside of my card prefabs. Okay. So that's the shuffle method. Does this make sense to you? And let me just make this var because that's what it wants. It wants me to make this var, right? It may not make sense, but what I'm doing here is literally exactly what we said. We're running through each object in the card prefabs, the original card prefabs. We're not going to delete them. We're just randomly putting them in a different order every single time we shuffle, right? So here at the top, now that we have the shuffle method, before we allocate the card prefabs, I'm just going to say shuffle. So shuffle shuffles them. And then what we're going to do is when we shuffle the cards, it's going to be in a random order that's going to be pushed onto the stack. So the stack is going to actually push random cards in the order that the card prefabs have them and push them on. Let's see if this is true. Let's run this thing and see what happens. So save, go back here and press play. And if I look inside of the cards array, we should have randomized cards now, not cards that are in order. Take a look at this. Look at these randomized cards here. So you can see that. So here, these ones are in order, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? And then we have stuff that is out of order. So up till this part right here, this is the first iteration of our cards, these ones, right? And then from here all the way down to here, we have a random set of cards in some random order that we put them in. Let's see how this looks. I want to talk about which one is which, because this is important. So going back to, let's go back to the game controller. And what I want to do is I want to expose the card prefabs list, which is now private. Let's see it. So we'll do some troubleshooting inside of the inspector, public, save. So public, remember the public keyword, it exposes any variable or collection inside the inspector in Unity, save. And let's go back to that and see what happened. Did it do exactly what we wanted or did it not? So if I press play here, and if I run it, then let's see what our game controller says. Game controller says that game controller doesn't say anything. And maybe I didn't save it. Standard deck, public list. Oh yeah. Because we're not attaching the public list to anything. And we're doing that. I want to make it so we can see it. The game controller here, standard deck of cards. I don't think this is going to be visible, but let's make it so that it is public in the game controller. Let's just do this. Public standard deck is, I don't think you'll be able to see it, deck. And then here we're going to say deck is equal to a new standard deck. I don't think this is going to make any difference. I don't think we'll see it here, but let's try and see what that looks like. We see them, but I want to make sure which one's which. I can't tell right now, right? So, and this is public. Let's see what happens. Yeah. I don't think so. It won't allow, and even if you, by the way, even if you went to the inspector, you can go in the inspector and look at debug mode. This is normal mode in the inspector. If I right click here, if I go to debug mode, it shows me more information, but nothing that can really help me. Nothing really, right? So Let's go back there and click normal again. So here's a way of doing it. We could separate them. Let's go back and make this private. This is in the deck card, the deck class, standard deck. And in my game controller, this is public, but we can make it private because maybe we want to have access to that deck later on. So private. And but one thing I want to do is let us go back into the standard deck, and instead of it having a, for my card parents of cards, let's make it so that we have two card parents just temporarily. We'll have a card parent that's going to be for my, like my prefabs, and a card parent that we're going to have for the cards in the scene. Okay, just to make it separate. And let's do that. We'll say that we'll make another thing inside the scene. So instead of cards are like, the cards in the scene, and the other ones will be like, card prefabs. Let's do that. So say something like another empty object, which will zero out. So I'll make it 0, reset it. And we'll call this thing this empty object. We'll call it, card prefabs. So we know which ones they are, which ones are going to be separate. I'm separating this so that we can see the difference between the cards and the card prefabs. Card prefabs are going to be where we have all the card prefabs, like before we put them into the deck of cards. We have almost like a list of cards that we've loaded from the operating system that we're going to hold there all at the same time. Okay, so back to this. When we do this inside of our private transform, I'm going to say a private transform here of card prefab parent, right? So just another kind of parent transform, card prefab parent. And the card prefab parent we're going to set up. We're going to say that the card prefab parent is going to be equal to game object dot find. And we're just going to call this just the same thing, like card prefab. I think it's prefabs, and then dot transform. Let's see if I did that right. Card prefabs. Yes, so that's what it should say here. It should say card prefabs. There we are. So I just made another parent that we can kind of put those cards in there. So in the scene hierarchy, we can see them. All right. Otherwise, we can't tell because they all look the same, right? All right, card prefab parent. We put them in the card prefabs. This is good. And then when we load the cards, instead of it putting it inside to the card parent, we'll put them in the card prefab parent. Card prefab parent. So that's the only difference on line 76 in the load method. We're just going to load up my regular card prefabs in the list of cards to the card prefab parent. Let's see what that looks like. But meanwhile, my other cards here, right, which are my regular cards, the ones that I'm going to show, are going to be in when I do that in the initialize step, I'm going to do that and I'll put them in the card parent. And so card parent have the cards that are going to be in the scene. The card prefab parent are the cards that I'm going to have that I can play around with in the background. Let's see what that looks like when I run it now. Okay, so back to this. And if I press play, then let's see what I get. So both have stuff now. So the cards look like this, nice and orderly. That's not what I wanted. And the card prefabs look like they are also nice and orderly. So what happened? Actually, no, sorry, let me go back. The card prefabs look like they're in order, right? And then the cards look like they're random. Huh? What happened? Right? Well, I want to talk about this in terms of, this is right, actually, but this is good. This is why we did this. It kind of put things in random order, right? These random cards in random order, right? So now if I was to deal the top card, club 9, that would be the 9 of clubs is going to be the first card on this thing every single time. If I re-roll this, let's just start it again. And let's take a look at cards. Again, you can see that inside the cards, we're going to see the 7 of clubs. And if I re-roll it again, if I run it again, you're going to see that inside of there, you're going to see the 9 of hearts. whatever it's going to be. So random cards, random order, this is working. The shuffle works. It's okay. But the reason why the cards prefab look like they're in order is because this is the original way they were added to the scene. This has nothing to do with the actual order they're being displayed inside of my you know, kind of inside the back working mechanism of the card. They're constantly being kind of shuffled, if you will. But here in the scene, they don't move because it doesn't matter the order, right? Okay, so I wanted to show you this because it's actually working. It's working. I've done the shuffle, okay? All right, so because we did the shuffle, let's put this up on GitHub. I'm going to use Visual Studio for this time. And the way to do that with Visual Studio is I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go to Terminal in Visual Studio, which is going to pull up this little terminal window. And I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to say something like git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say added shuffle function to standard deck. Git push. And you can see that the standard deck was the thing that changed, right? And it's going to go up. And if I look on GitHub, up online, let's go to GitHub. And if I look and refresh, and if I look here, you can see that the changes changed. If I go to assets, and if I look at which things changed, you can see that inside scripts, you can see that the standard deck class changed. And if I want to, I can also look at what changed, right? So there's something called blame, right? Which is basically a revision, right? So you can see the stuff that changed from commit to commit, which is kind of neat, right? So that's what's happening now. You can see what's changed. You can see that this part was added, right? And it kind of goes through one thing at a time, and you can see when it was done and what was done. Okay, so pretty cool. So that's what this does. This is kind of a neat little function that's built into GitHub. Blame. That's what that is. All right, very nice. Also history, which is another thing. History tells you the commits that affected that particular file. That's another thing to do. And you can actually look at where it says added shuffle function. You can actually look in the code, right? View the code at this point in history. You can see what it looks like. That's when I did it. You can also look at here the changes. If I look at that commit details, then you can look at the changes in the commit. It'll actually show you stuff that I erased, moved, and the whole thing. You can go in very much detail. Green is add, right? As an example, red is change or remove. So notice that on line 71, I removed card parent and I added, you know, card parent prefab. That's the change I made. You can actually kind of review everything up on GitHub. I know exactly what's happening here. Okay. Nice. So that's how it works. Back to this and back out and back out. And we're here. You can see that this is the ICE4 that we're working with. Excellent. Just want to show you that. Great. So now that we've got that, we've got the ability for me to shuffle my deck. I want to be able to deal cards with my deck because right now we have these cards that I kind of put in place randomly. And this is where we get to another step. I think that we should take a small break, 5 minutes, go for a bathroom break, come back, and then we'll talk about how to deal the random cards. What does deal mean for us and how they appear, how they visually appear on our table for us. This is kind of another thing to do. So let's take a short break, come back, and we'll do the dealing part.